Widowed cowboy searched for someone to feed his baby, until a starving mother knocked with full breast. Montana Territory, winter of 1874. The snow came down in curtains, thick and merciless, erasing the world beyond the front porch of the Marston Ranch. Wind howled like a wounded animal, scraping against the logs of the small cabin. Inside, the fire in the hearth had shrunk to little more than a glow. Luke Marston sat slumped in a worn wooden rocker, holding his infant daughter, Rosie, against his chest. Her face was flushed from crying, her tiny fists trembling with need. She had been wailing for 3 days. No milk, no rest, no peace. He whispered, again and again, as if the rhythm of his voice might fill her hollow stomach. "I know, sweetheart. I know, I know." He had ridden to every ranch within 10 miles. Each time, he asked the same thing with the same hoarse voice. If anyone had a woman still nursing, anyone who could feed a child, not their own. Each time, he was met with shaking heads and sorrowful eyes. "Sorry, Luke. Ain't nobody still got milk round here." He had buried Ellie, his wife, on the first snow. She had bled out in childbirth, holding Luke's hand, whispering, "Take care of her." He had failed. Rosie screamed in his arms, her tiny body begging for what he could not give. Luke closed his eyes, resting his forehead against hers, and for a moment he felt himself slipping into a kind of numbness. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was all there was. Then 3 sharp knocks at the door. He flinched. The baby paused, gasped, then cried harder. Luke rose, slowly, shifting Rosie to one arm, and reached for the rifle leaning against the wall. He opened the door just a crack, expecting wind, maybe a stray coyote. Instead, there stood a woman. She was trembling, soaked in snow, her coat torn at the seams. Her skin was pale, lips bluish from cold, but her eyes were alive with something fierce. Her hands clutched at her belly, and on the front of her blouse, a dark patch spread slowly from her chest. "Milk." Her voice came out as a whisper, brittle and cracked. I have milk. I have nowhere else to go." Luke stared at her, stunned. His heart thudded loud in his ears. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Rosie let out a wail so sharp it cut through the wind like a blade. Luke stepped back and gestured her in. The woman hesitated, then crossed the threshold. The cabin was small, a single room with a cot by the fire. Luke motioned to it. "She's starving," he said, voice shaking. "She won't stop crying." The woman walked over to the cot. Her hands trembled as she unfastened the top of her dress. She turned her back toward Luke, settling onto the edge of the cot with a practiced gentleness, and reached for the baby. Luke hesitated, then, slowly, placed Rosie into her arms. The moment the child was cradled against the stranger's breast, the crying stopped. Rosie latched. A soft sound of suckling filled the room, and the woman bowed her head, silent tears sliding down her cheeks. Luke stood frozen, watching. A knot in his chest, tight for days, began to loosen. For the first time in nearly a week, the cabin was quiet. The fire snapped, wind shook the door behind them, and in that stillness, something changed. After a long while, the baby slept, her mouth still gently pressed to the woman's skin. She looked up at Luke, brushing a strand of damp hair from her face. "What's her name?" she asked, voice steadier now. "Rosie," Luke said. "Rosie Marston." The woman nodded. She looked exhausted, hollowed out. Luke grabbed a blanket from the chair and handed it to her. "I'm Luke," he said quietly. She held the baby a little tighter. "Mariah," she replied. Luke crouched to tend the fire. He added a log, watched the sparks catch. Then he looked back over his shoulder, his voice barely above the wind outside. "You just have her?" Mariah did not answer. He turned. She was staring into the fire now, her jaw tight, her eyes distant, hollow as a grave. "Where's your baby?" he asked gently. She said nothing, but her arms pulled Rosie a little closer, and in her eyes there was a silence so deep it said everything. The next morning came slow and gray. Snow still clung to the windows, and the wind had quieted to a low sigh across the plains. Mariah was still there. She had not said she would stay, but she had not left either. She sat near the hearth, Rosie asleep in her arms, wrapped in the same blanket Luke had laid over her the night before. They had not spoken more than names, he did not ask questions, and she did not offer answers. They moved like strangers on a narrow bridge, each step unsure if the other would let them pass. Only Rosie broke the silence, and only with softness. She nursed calmly now, her cheeks no longer hollow, her body no longer stiff with hunger. When she slept, it was deep and still, like the snow outside. Luke watched her breathe, then rose to tend the fire. The last of the kindling was running low. He pulled a tin of salt pork from the shelf and set to work. Potatoes, a bit shriveled, were sliced and added to a pot of water. It was not much, but it was warm. As it cooked, the scent filled the cabin. Mariah shifted slightly near the fire. She had not eaten since arriving. Luke had not missed the way her hands trembled or how her knees buckled when she stepped inside the night before. She did not ask for food. She simply sat, arms around Rosie, watching the flames with a distant gaze. Luke ladled the stew into a bowl and set it on the table. Then, without a word, he scooped a second bowl and placed it gently on the floor beside her. He did not look at her. He only returned to his chair and stirred the pot with slow, thoughtful motions. Mariah glanced at the bowl. Her hands remained around the baby, but her eyes lingered on the steam curling from the food. She hesitated. When she finally reached for the bowl, it was with the caution of someone used to being punished for wanting something. She ate slowly. Her hands shook at first. Each spoonful was measured, quiet. She kept her gaze on the bowl, never lifting her head, though Luke could see the way her throat worked hard to swallow. The stew was simple, but to her, it seemed like a banquet. He watched her from the corner of his eye. Something about the way she hunched around the bowl made his chest ache. A woman that young, that thin, should not look so starved, not just in body, in spirit. Mariah turned her face away and wiped at her cheek. Luke stood, made as if to check the fire, then walked past her on his way to the door. He paused only briefly, setting down a clean rag and half a loaf of bread beside her. He said nothing. Neither did she. But as he opened the door and stepped into the cold to gather more firewood, he caught something in her expression, a flicker of something that was not fear, not resistance, just the faintest trace of trust. That night, she slept on the rug by the hearth again, Rosie bundled against her chest. The cabin was still, the wind distant. Luke lay on his cot on the far side of the room, arms folded beneath his head, eyes open. He listened to the soft breaths of the baby, the low crackle of the fire, and the faint shifting of Mariah's body in sleep. He could not stop thinking about the way she had held Rosie, the way her face had softened, even for a moment, while feeding her, the tears she had hidden while eating. She had not said a single word about herself, but something about her presence, her silence, her sadness, gnawed at him. Luke closed his eyes. She did not speak, he thought. But she had held Rosie like a mother, and the pain in her eyes was not a stranger's pain. The fire had died low, but not out. Outside, the wind had calmed to a whisper, brushing the snowdrifts like a sleeping animal. Inside, the cabin was cloaked in shadows and hush. Luke stirred from his sleep. It was not the cold that woke him, nor the usual rustle of Rosie's soft breaths. It was something quieter, a sound threaded with grief. He sat up slowly. There it was again, a faint sobbing. He stood and stepped lightly across the wooden floor. The fire cast just enough glow to catch the outline of Mariah sitting by the hearth, her back to him. She was holding Rosie in her arms, not just holding, but clutching her, rocking her gently in a rhythm that spoke of habit, not necessity. Rosie was asleep, but Mariah was not. Tears slid silently down her face as she looked into the baby's peaceful expression. Luke did not speak at first. He stood still, watching. The way Mariah curled around the child, the way her arms tightened with every soft cry from her throat, told him more than any words ever could. After a long moment, he stepped closer. "Did your baby die?" he asked gently. Mariah did not look at him. She did not nod. She did not shake her head. She only held Rosie tighter, her whole body tensing as if the question alone had reopened a wound. Luke sat down beside the fire, keeping his distance. He waited. Finally, in a voice rough as broken gravel, she spoke. 3 weeks ago. A boy. He was perfect, healthy, mine." She swallowed hard, her eyes fixed on the flames. "My husband said he had my mouth, but not my eyes. Said the boy looked wrong. Said I must have been unfaithful." Luke said nothing. Mariah continued, her tone flat, as if reading from the charred pages of a story she no longer believed belonged to her. He would not listen. He raved, accused. Then, one night, he picked the baby up and said, "This one does not belong to me." I screamed. I begged. Her voice cracked. But he did it anyway. She held Rosie tighter, rocking more slowly now. "He broke my son's neck and left him on the floor like he was nothing." Luke's breath caught in his chest. Mariah went on. "I tried to run then, but he locked me inside. Said I would give him another, a better one. Said he would keep me in that house until I learned to be loyal." The fire popped. Mariah blinked, her lashes wet. "One night, he drank too much. I got the back door open, took nothing but the clothes I had on. I walked until I could not walk anymore. Then I kept going." She looked down at Rosie. "I still had milk, still do. My body does not know he is gone." Rosie stirred in her sleep and made a small sound. Mariah hushed her without thinking, her hand brushing gently across the baby's cheek. Luke stared at the fire. It was too much to take in all at once, too brutal, too close to something he did not know how to name. He looked at Mariah. She was not crying now. Her eyes were dry, red-rimmed, staring through the wall as if she still saw the man who haunted her. He reached out, slowly, and laid a hand on her shoulder. "You do not have to tell it again," he said. "Not here. Not ever." She did not move, but her breathing slowed. "There is no judgment in this house," he said softly. Still, she did not answer. But her body eased, just enough that her shoulders dropped, and her grip on the baby gentled. Luke let go and stood, returning to his cot. As he lay down, he listened to the quiet. The fire cracked, Rosie sighed in her sleep, and for the first time, Mariah did not cry. Morning came with pale light and a sky the color of tin. Snow had stopped falling sometime in the night, leaving behind a brittle silence and a world coated in white. Mariah was already awake. Luke stepped into the main room and found her at the hearth. The fire was lit, the pot had been cleaned. She was kneeling near the stove, arranging kindling with a practiced hand. She did not look at him, but she did not flinch either. On the table, a small bundle of cloth lay neatly folded, his old flannel shirt, cut and sewn into a rough pillowcase. Beside the cot, the old wooden cradle had been pulled out from the shadows and scrubbed clean. Mariah had restrung its base with twine and tucked Rosie into it, wrapped snugly. The baby slept peacefully, one hand curled beneath her chin. Luke stood still for a long moment. She had not asked, she had not said a word, but she had taken what was broken, what was buried in dust and disuse, and made it useful again. He nodded once, more to himself than to her, and stepped outside to chop wood. That afternoon they worked together. Mariah collected snow in buckets and boiled it. Luke repaired the broken latch on the barn door. When he came back in, she had made tea from pine needles. It was bitter but warm. They did not talk much, but they no longer moved like strangers. They passed tools without asking, shared bread without words. He refilled her cup without looking. She folded his spare shirts without comment. In the quiet, something took root. Late that day, just before the sun dipped low behind the ridgeline, Luke motioned to her. "Come with me." Mariah glanced at him, unsure. He nodded toward the coat hanging by the door. "Just for a minute." She bundled Rosie and wrapped herself in the heavy wool coat. Luke led them beyond the barn, through knee-deep snow, to a small rise at the edge of the pasture. There, beneath a crooked pine tree, stood a single wooden cross. The grave was simple. The name carved into it read, Ellie Marston. No date, no epitaph, just her name. Luke knelt beside it and brushed snow from the base with his glove. Mariah stood a few paces behind, holding the baby close to her chest. "I buried her the morning after Rosie was born," he said. "It was snowing then, too." He looked up at the sky. She did not scream, not once. She just smiled, held my hand, told me to take care of our girl. He rose slowly. "I failed her, for a while." Mariah stepped closer but said nothing. "I see her sometimes," Luke added, voice quieter now. "In dreams, or in the baby's face, or in the way the wind moves over the hill." Mariah looked down at the cross. The snow had melted slightly where Luke's hand had rested. She bent and laid Rosie gently in the crook of her arm. With her free hand, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a tiny purple flower, one of the last wild blossoms clinging to life near the woodshed. She knelt and placed it at the base of the grave. No words. Luke watched her. They stood there for a while, the wind brushing over their shoulders, the sky dimming to blue. The pine tree above them creaked softly in the cold. When they walked back to the cabin, they did not hold hands, but they did not walk far apart either. It was near sundown when the rider came. The air had gone still, the kind of stillness that made dogs bark for no reason, and horses shift uneasily in their stalls. Luke was tightening the latch on the chicken coop when he saw the figure coming down the hill, tall in the saddle, black coat flapping like wings behind him. The man rode a dark horse, mud-streaked and mean-looking. His face was shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but Luke saw the way he sat the saddle, too stiff for a trader, too quiet for a neighbor. Luke straightened and set his jaw. The rider stopped at the gate, didn't dismount. "You Luke Marston?" he called, voice smooth as oil but cold underneath. Luke nodded once, keeping one hand near the fence post where his rifle leaned. "I am." The stranger glanced at the cabin, where a curl of smoke drifted from the chimney. His eyes narrowed. "I'm lookin' for a woman," he said. "Young. Brown hair. Might be travelin' with an infant that ain't hers." Luke said nothing. The man tilted his head. "She'd be about 24, pretty, thin, might not talk much." Luke shrugged. "Plenty of folks pass through these parts. No one like that here." The man smiled, but it never touched his eyes. "Funny thing," he said. "Tracks lead right to your barn. I followed 'em from 3 ridges over. Some folks say she's dangerous." "She's not here," Luke said firmly. The man tipped his hat, still smiling. "Well," he drawled, "you keep your eyes open then. Trouble has a way of curling up by the fire when no one's looking." He turned his horse with a jerk and trotted off without another word. Luke watched him disappear into the trees, then exhaled slowly. He did not realize how tightly he had been gripping the fence post until he let go and saw the blood where a splinter had pierced his palm. Inside the cabin, Mariah was already standing by the window. Her face was pale. Rosie stirred in her arms. "You know him?" Luke asked quietly. She nodded, barely. "One of my husband's men. He called him Cyrus. Paid to find things, or people." Luke locked the door behind him and pulled the curtains. Mariah sat down by the fire, holding Rosie close, her eyes glassy. "I should go," she said. "I should not have stayed this long." Luke turned sharply. "No. I have brought danger to you, to her." "You have brought her life," Luke said. "You have brought me sleep, food, warmth." He crouched in front of her. "I lost Ellie because I could not protect her. I will not lose another soul in this house just because a man came asking questions." Mariah looked at him, her lip trembling. "I do not want to be the reason something happens to her. She is already yours, in all the ways that matter." Mariah bowed her head. Luke stood and walked to the cupboard. From the top shelf, he pulled down a small box. Inside was a revolver, polished but old. He opened the chamber, checked it, then held it out to her. She carried this every time I went away. She never fired it, but she kept it loaded. Mariah looked at the weapon, then at Luke. She? My wife, he said softly. Mariah hesitated, then took the gun. Her hands no longer trembled. She must have been brave, she whispered. Luke gave a small smile. She was, but she was also afraid. Being brave is not about never fearing, it is about choosing not to run when you want to. Mariah looked down at the sleeping child in her arms, then back at the fire. For the first time since she had arrived, there was no panic in her face. Only resolve. The storm rolled in without warning. Wind tore across the range, and the temperature dropped so fast the water trough froze solid by nightfall. The cattle grew restless, spooked by the wind and the strange pressure in the air. Luke was out late, checking the herd. One of the calves had wandered too close to the ravine that split the north pasture. The mother lowed and circled, but would not go down after it. So Luke did. By the time he hauled the calf back up the embankment, his hands were numb and his breath shallow. He had slipped halfway, his shoulder cracking hard against a rock. Still, he walked home with the calf slung across his back like a sack of feed. Mariah met him at the door, her face blanching as he staggered inside, soaked and pale. Put it in the barn, he mumbled. You are bleeding, she said. He did not answer. He sank to his knees in the doorway. Then the darkness took him. For the next 2 days, he drifted in and out of fever. Mariah never left his side. She stitched the gash across his shoulder, cleaned the wound with whiskey, and packed it with crushed yarrow. She boiled water, fed Rosie, stoked the fire until it burned strong. She coaxed broth into Luke's mouth with a wooden spoon, sat beside him through the night, and sang softly under her breath when she thought he could not hear. On the 3rd night, the fever broke. Luke opened his eyes to the dim orange glow of firelight. The pain in his arm was sharp but clean. He could move his fingers. He blinked, then looked down. Rosie was curled up between him and Mariah, fast asleep. Mariah sat slouched in the chair beside the cot, her head resting against the edge of the mattress. One hand still held a cool cloth draped across his forehead. Her breathing was slow, lips parted slightly in sleep. Luke did not move. He looked at the woman who had fed his child, fought to protect her, and now nursed him back from the edge. She was not just surviving anymore, she was rebuilding. And somehow, she had brought him back with her. He reached over slowly with his good arm and touched the back of her hand. Her fingers twitched in response, but she did not wake. He bent forward and pressed his lips to her knuckles. It was not a kiss of passion. It was not lust. It was a thank you. A prayer, a vow. Mariah stirred, eyes fluttering open. She looked at him, surprised to see him awake. Then she saw their hands. And the tears came, quiet and sudden. She did not speak, neither did he. But something passed between them, deeper than names, older than grief. She wiped her face quickly and gave him a small, trembling smile. He smiled back. Then they both looked down at the child between them, who sighed in her sleep and reached out blindly, one small hand landing on Mariah's chest. Luke closed his eyes. He no longer felt the fever. He only felt the warmth of the fire and the steady breath of 2 hearts that had not known rest for a long time. The snow had melted to mud by the time he came. 3 riders appeared at the edge of the pasture, just as the sun was setting in a blaze of copper. Luke saw them first, from the barn, silhouettes dark against the orange sky. He knew who they were before they even spoke. The man in the center dismounted first, broad shoulders, black coat, hair slicked back like tar. His boots struck the ground with the confidence of someone who believed the world owed him obedience. Mariah stepped out of the cabin behind Luke, holding Rosie tight. It was him, her husband. You look thinner than I remember, the man said. But I suppose that is what happens when you go crawling through the snow like a dog. Luke moved to stand between them. You are not welcome here, he said. The man gave a short laugh. I am not here for welcome. I am here for what is mine. He gestured to Mariah. She belongs to me. Mariah's breath hitched, but she said nothing. I do not want her, he continued. Not really. But you see, I cannot have folks thinking a man like me can be walked away from. What would that say about me? He looked around at the cabin, the barn, the fields. Nice little life you have built here. Shame to burn it down. Luke's jaw clenched. She is not your property. She is not your property. She is my wife. Not anymore. The man smiled. Oh, that is sweet. You think saying it makes it true. The two men behind him moved slightly, hands resting on their hips. Guns waited at their sides. Mariah whispered behind Luke. He will not stop, Luke. He will burn this place to the ground. Luke stepped forward. Then let it burn around me, but you will not touch her. The silence cracked like ice. Then everything moved at once. The first shot came from the left, one of the henchmen drawing too fast and too sloppy. Luke spun, returning fire. The second man went for Mariah. She ducked and ran behind the well, clutching Rosie. Luke took a bullet in the side, stumbled, fell to one knee. The husband moved forward, pulling his own pistol with a sneer. This ends now. From behind the well, a second shot rang out. Sharp. Controlled. Mariah stood, holding the revolver Luke had given her, arms steady. The bullet hit the man square in the thigh. He howled, fell backward, his weapon flying from his hand. His men were already down, one dead, one groaning in the dirt. Luke pressed a hand to his side, blood hot between his fingers. Mariah ran to him. He gritted his teeth, trying to sit up. Still breathing, he said through clenched teeth. She dropped beside him, checking the wound. Not clean, but not fatal. Stay still, she whispered. Behind them, the man screamed curses, crawling in the mud. Mariah rose and walked to him, gun still in hand. He looked up at her, face twisted with fury and disbelief. You think this is over? You think they will not come for you? Mariah stared down at him. I hope they do, because next time I will not aim for the leg. She stepped back as Luke struggled to his feet. He leaned on her shoulder, and together they stood over the man who had tried to own her. We will bring him in, Luke said. Let the sheriff see who he really is. They tied him to his horse and sent him down the road, the surviving man limping behind. The fire in the cabin was still burning when they returned. Rosie was asleep on the cot. Mariah sat beside her, still clutching the revolver. Luke leaned in the doorway, arm wrapped in a blood-soaked cloth, his face pale. You all right? He asked. Mariah looked at him, her eyes full of something fierce and quiet. I will be. He nodded. So will we. Spring had come early that year. The hills behind the Marston Ranch rolled green beneath a blue sky so wide it seemed to go on forever. Snowmelt fed the creek again, and the wind carried the scent of new blossoms and turned soil. Mariah knelt in the garden, gloved hands dirt-streaked, pressing a small seedling into place. Around her, rows of flowers bloomed, wild violets, prairie asters, and marigolds. The soil was soft now, forgiving. Life had found its way back. Rosie played nearby, chasing a moth through the grass. Her laugh rang out, high and clear. Mariah smiled and stood, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked toward the edge of the pasture where the small cross still stood, weathered by time but lovingly kept. Flowers now grew around it in a perfect circle. Later that afternoon, Luke walked there alone. He held a folded piece of paper in his hand, the edges worn from where he had read it over and over, trying to find the right words. He knelt and placed the letter at the base of the cross, anchoring it with a flat stone. The wind picked at it gently, but it held. He stayed quiet for a while, then finally spoke aloud. You always said if I ever found someone who could love Rosie the way you would have, I should not turn away from it. He looked up at the sky. I think you would have liked her. She is not what people expect. She is better. He took a breath, steady and full. She never tried to replace you, but somehow she still found a way to stay. A soft voice called from behind him. "Luke." He turned. Mariah stood holding Rosie, her hair loose in the breeze, her dress brushed by the tall grass. He walked toward them, reached out to take Rosie from her arms. The child leaned into his shoulder, drowsy from play. They stood together a moment, 3 shadows cast long in the golden light. Luke looked back once more at the grave. In his heart, he whispered the final lines of the letter. "You once gave me a family. Now I get to keep it, thanks to a woman I think you would have called sister." They walked up the hill together. The wind carried wildflower petals across the field, and from the rise, they could see the whole of the ranch below: barn, fence lines, cabin, garden. A quiet place built from the ruins of sorrow. Rosie reached out a small hand to touch Mariah's face. "Ma," she said softly. Mariah smiled and pressed a kiss to her forehead. They stood at the top of the hill, the sky above them endless, the land below filled with promise. The past rested where it belonged, and the future waited, already blooming. Thank you for riding with us through this powerful journey of grief, courage, and quiet love. If this story stirred something in you, if you felt the ache of loss, the flicker of hope, or the fire of devotion that doesn't need a name, then this is where you belong. Tap that like button if your heart held its breath when Mariah raised the gun. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales, where bullets miss, but hearts do not. Where love rises from dust, danger, and silence. New stories drop every week, stories of forbidden glances, redemptive letters, and passion that defies history. This is Wild West Love Stories, where love outlives the gunfire.